Welcome, everyone. This is the sixth of a series of conversations with Miki Kashtan in response to the coronavirus and in relation to her article series called Apart and Together, focusing on what opportunities in all the pain it brought, the coronavirus opens up for creating a new way of living that actually works for all. The last piece in this series, which we will be talking about today, is called Accepting Our Vulnerability to Consume Less. So, Miki, in your article, as I understand it, you touch on three main points. And one is that the myth of economic growth and our destructive consumption behaviors in belief of this myth. And the other one is how it brings our species to extinction along with thousands of others, while also depleting our planet. And the opportunity that coronavirus has brought to us for shifting to another perception of economics and realigning our consumption choices with life.
Mm-hmm.
And my question to begin with is, what you call a myth is the foundational principle which the entire capitalist economy is built on.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the principle of the economy has to grow. And if the economy grows, people's well-being will be increased. So can you say why you call this a myth, and why you have adapted this belief that economic growth doesn't actually support people's well-being beyond a certain threshold, and then it even degenerates the well-being of life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I first of all want to start with individuals because there have been many, many studies, and they're not in the article, but I am aware of them that show that the relationship between how much income one has and how happy one is not a linear relationship. Up to a certain point, having more income, more access to resources improves your well-being as an individual. And then beyond a certain point, it flattens and even goes down. And so it never surprised me to see that a similar relationship exists on an aggregate level. Aggregate level meaning for a whole society. And if you think of it, if you try to look at what is it that creates well-being, you can actually understand it without even looking at economics. Think about it this way. We have needs that are material, and we have needs that are not material. If our material needs are not attended to, then our bodies will suffer. There's no question about it. If we don't have enough food, if we don't have a decent place where we can sleep, if we don't have clothes to cover ourselves in places where it's necessary, if we don't have access to medical care, which is itself a problematic concept, it's a global north concept, but if we don't have access to what supports health physically, our well-being will be small. Now, if you add money to each of our pockets, we can improve our material needs. We can have more of our material needs met. And then, there's only so much food you can eat. There's only so many clothes you can wear. There's only so many rooms you can sleep in. There is an actual organic limit to our material needs. Pumping more money into us beyond that feeds into some idea that non-material needs can be attended to through material means. And beyond a certain point, clearly that decreases our well-being. I'll give an example, a simple example. Therapy. Therapy is an alienated form of getting care and support for ourselves. Why am I calling it alienated? Because love, understanding, empathy, togetherness, accompaniment are fundamental relational qualities that we seek to give and receive from others for our well-being. Making that into a commodity that somebody goes to school to learn how to do and then sells their services to another person means that we never can be fully certain that the therapist actually loves us. And so there's this contradiction. We go to the therapy for love, but we pay for it. Can we ever get the love we want from the therapist by paying for it? And this is just one example. So to whatever extent we're trying to attend to non-material needs in material ways, we will increase and increase our alienation. The people who don't have a lot of material resources, I'm not trying to romanticize, they know very well that they need each other in order to survive and sustain themselves. And that keeps them connected. Even if there's suffering, there's a connection. I'm now reading a book that has articles about the way women are organizing all over the world to collectivize, communalize so-called domestic chores that in the global north separate us from each other and keep each of us apart. They are trying to come back together. They know they need each other. They are poor women, that they have pride in their struggle and in their capacity to come together and do this. I'm sure, Rina, you know about such things because there are many places in India where women do that, where the global market is trying to force people all over the world to have to rely on the market for their basic needs. And that separates them from each other and makes things in many ways worse. But even before we get to that, just the fact that we're trying to attend to non-material needs with material means is going to reduce our individual well-being. And on a collective level, two things decline. One is, I believe we have, how would I call it? A subterranean relationship with life as a whole. I mean subterranean in the sense that we're not like sitting there conscious of being part of life. That is part of the condition of modernity, is that we're not conscious of being part of life, but we are. And therefore, the decline of life, the decline of capacity of the biosphere affects us. We are even less connected than we were before. So that's one way in which increasing the economy. Where does the economy increase from? It increases from encroaching on natural resources and from encroaching on relationships. New products come from basically extracting things from the planet. New services come from converting what human beings did within communal relationships into commodities. So either way, we are encroaching on life and we feel it. So the cost of continuing to increase the economy is the reason why at a certain point we can no longer increase our well-being with the economic growth. Is this clear enough?
It's very clear. It's very clear. Thank you.
And mine goes a little step further. I've been thinking about the belief you write about in this article around countries in the global south, the countries that started developing later, than those in the global north, economically, especially in so-called developing nations. And some economists have found that while they grow economically, the growth in the well-being of the people in these countries flattens out over time, and it's a lower level of welfare or standard of living than for the earlier countries. So the belief, as I understand it, is that the developing countries don't succeed in growing and improving the welfare of their people, so it's their fault. It's not the result of, rather than being the result of the global economic system and how it functions.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the pull yourself up by the bootstraps phenomenon writ large.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love you to expand on this and its implications for humans and our planet.
Yeah. Two things that I have to say about that. One is there's a general myth that resources flow from the global north to the global south. And the reality, and you can dig up about it on the internet and you will find visual representations that show that if you really add up the full flow of resources, it's about, I don't remember the numbers right now, but maybe 5 or 10 times more resources flow from the global south to the global north than in the other direction. So that is not known to many people because everybody knows about aid programs to poor countries that can't care for themselves. What did they do before colonization started, which is the majority of their existence? What did they do? It seems like they did just fine, especially those that were indigenous. So the colonization and subsequently the encroachment of global capital essentially displaced people from subsistence economies into reliance on the market. Now, as the word subsistence economy in the modern global north economics framework equals primitive, equals undeveloped, equals backwards, equals problematic. But if you think about it from the perspective of the people living within a subsistence economy, unlike modern economies, a subsistence economy doesn't need to grow. It is a steady state economy, and therefore it is in full balance with life. It doesn't take from life more than is needed, and therefore it doesn't deteriorate the conditions that surround it. People have lived in subsistence economy for hundreds and thousands of years just fine. Both those that were foraging cultures and those that were subsistence farming cultures. Both of those have developed their patterns of reciprocity and mutuality with life. So, for example, when the colonists came to North America, they were laughing at the local people for harvesting only half of what was on the land, thought of them as lazy. But in reality, if you harvest only half of what is in the land, it results in perpetual regeneration. Whereas if you harvest everything, you deplete it over time. So there is wisdom in subsistence economies. And the whole paradigm of development has rested on the premise that subsistence economies are a problem, and they're especially a problem for the global north, because if a community is in the global south and is a subsistence economy community, they don't need the market and they have nothing to give to the market. Therefore, the global capital with the intention to maximize profit in any way possible, there's a definite incentive in displacing that, shifting it into extractive economies, which deplete the land, deplete the air and the water, and make the people who live there shifting from people who are in subsistence economies and are doing just fine into quote unquote unskilled laborers. That is the pattern. Or else they are forced into growing cash crops for export. And either way, they are required to pay full market prices for things that previously they were able to grow or share with each other. So the whole idea of development, of like countries starting to develop, all of that is within the myth that says economic growth, northern style, that is the best life there is. And if we don't question that fundamental premise, we are marching towards extinction. So it's because if it was so good, why do we have so many degenerative diseases? Why do we have so many mental health issues? Much more in the global north than in the global south. Why? If it's such a good life, there's something that doesn't add up. If you begin to think about it, bit by bit, one block at a time, disintegrates. So first of all, there's this, the idea that development is the only path and is the path that every place in the world would want. The wanting it comes from two things. One is there are always local ruling classes that want to play in the global market. So even if we go back to the beginning of capitalism, the slave trade would not have been possible if there weren't local people who would be willing to capture and sell their own people. It wouldn't happen without that. So there are always local people, and I'm not blaming them or making them bad guys. I'm saying that the logic of capitalism separates people to such a degree that they're willing to turn on each other for some possible gain. So that's one of the drivers, is local ruling classes that want to play in the extractive economy. The other is that people are displaced, must rely on the market, and are bombarded by products and by TV that introduce them to ideas of what the good life is, that end up pushing, creating a demand and a desire for a different way of living than one that has worked for a very long time. In the year 2000, there was a project that was done of filming families, average families in like 50, 60 different countries, and taking photographs. And the people who did the project lived with the family for a week, took pictures, and then at the end had them take all of their belongings out, and they sat with all of their belongings. And you could see these pictures really show you the vast differences between countries. They were sitting within the picture and they were asked to hold their most prized possession. And that part was really devastating to me because the majority of them held their TV set as their most prized possession. And when I saw that, it's like, oh my God, we really are destroying variability, local cultures, resilience, self-reference, self-rule, all of these things. We are destroying them through the encroachment of the market. So that's in terms of why it even is happening. And then your question is, if they tried harder, wouldn't they be able to do that? So two things. One is if we agree with the premise, it's a hard premise, but it is my premise, that growing the economy is always either stealing from nature or stealing from people, then the beginning of capitalism, everywhere that it begins, goes towards stealing land from people. Everywhere there is land enclosures. This never fails. There's also growing mistreatment of women, um, reduction of power of women within the economy, forcing of women to produce more children. All of these things go along with the establishment of capitalism. But one thing that is key is the European countries that started the capitalist development did it in part through creating cheap labor in other places. The countries of the global south don't have that option. There is no quote unquote frontier. There's nowhere to go to get slaves. There's nowhere to go to colonize, even if they wanted to do it. They can't create that cheap labor. They are cheap labor for the countries of the global north that are still driving the economy in so much of the global south. So there is a real question of where would resources come from to do the investment in infrastructure and the extraction of value from laborers. They can't do that. So that's one thing. The other is related to what I was talking with Oske about, which is if we accept the threshold hypothesis by Manfred Max Neef, which in country after country shows itself to be true, of course, I'm sure that many mainstream economists would question and challenge the data. And I'm not an economist myself, so I can only rely on secondary sources. But if we accept this premise, then a corollary of it is that happens is that as there's less and less to steal from, you're not going to be able to grow your economy in ways that don't create additional costs. And so the capacity to create well-being through growing the economy caps at a lower level. So we have stolen even that from the global south, even the capacity to get themselves out of poverty in means that I don't particularly want those means, but even if they want them, they can't have them. And so in my mind, the only way out is shifting from economic growth to steady state economies. And there are more and more people who are beginning to consider how to create steady state economies that are sustainable and where resource distribution is much more equitable. The work is being done. Yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, it really helped me understand the myths underlying that whole conclusion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm letting it all sink in because, wow, I mean, I can relate to what you're saying. Being in Pune in India, I'm not from a metro city, but a second tier city, which is quite in the growth period, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the pandemic, I'm responding to this statement that you made that unless the changes shift from being imposed to being chosen, the impacts of reduction in consumption will be temporary.
Yes.
So I was I mean, referring to that during my research in my neighborhood and also amongst the women who have jobs in corporates. Okay, so these are the women who really are very comfortable shopping, spending money. And I have seen the difference in the pattern of consumption. So basically, this is, we see a slice of society in our neighborhood. I think that's the level of exposure and stimulation or
Yeah.
stimulus to each one of us in these cities. Like you see the haves and the have-nots right there in front of you every single day. And we are interacting with them as well. So having said that, I noticed that, you know, homemade meals, people are cooking their own meals, and also there are people who are enjoying cooking and they start taking orders. So because there are no restaurants and there are no big shops to go to for shopping, the local traders are given that support and so much gratitude that the family run small shops are appreciated right now. The connections, the conversations, you know, all that has become a part of the market.
Yeah.
So another thing is engineers who were corporate walkouts. They bought land and now they are scaling up their farming activities on their land so that there is a smart looking ex-corporate person who might have been a CEO who is now coming home to my place to deliver eggs or milk, you know, from a happy cow. So, you know, things like that. So my question is, could you elaborate on this? I've seen that in the
Yeah.
beginning, all this was imposed on us, but now I see a lot of us making new choices.
So let me say two things. One is the gift that the coronavirus brings in this instance is it shows us A, that our extreme patterns of consumption don't protect us, and B, that we actually can live on a lot less. Those of us who have been the consumers, we can live on a lot less. So we know it's possible. But moving from possible and imposed to possible and chosen is a step. And that step is not an easy step to take when you have been used to defining yourself by what you consume, which is very prevalent in the global north. Your patterns of consumption are what defines your group membership. You know, you buy at Whole Foods, you're a particular category. You buy at a supermarket, you're a different category. You buy yoga classes, you're one category. You buy junk food, you're another category. All of these things are all consumption choices. This whole notion of lifestyle is based on what we buy, not who we relate to and how and what choices we make in terms of purpose and vision and values and all of that. That is not what defines lifestyle. Now, I don't know this, but my hunch is, as I'm hearing you, is that it's like there are fewer generations in places like India, fewer generations since people were severed from the land. Like I know in Africa, I don't know in India, but in Africa, a lot of people, even people who live in cities, even people who have jobs, they still have a village that they're connected with, to which they can, you know, withdraw if things get hard, and they will still be fed and cared for. There are networks of support. You're in the city, you have a job, and you send money back. All of these things still maintain ties to the land in a way that in a place like the United States, that doesn't even exist anymore. So I would imagine that India is more like Africa than like the US, that maybe like 1 or 2 generations of displacement from the land, and maybe you still have relatives, maybe you still have access to the land, and your body has a shorter memory of what it was like to be in relationship with the land. So the option of choosing it may be more accessible in a place like India than in the global north, but I don't know. This is just a conjecture. What do you think?
Yeah, I think for me, if not a sibling, there is an aunt who lives in a rural or a village, or there's some connection
Yeah.
with. So for me, I'm 59, and I mean, I think that's true. And many people have a sibling in a corporate space and another in a school in a village. You know,
Mhm.
even that I have
Yeah.
heard. From my yeah, and the inherent interdependence that we live from is very. I realize it's a very rich environment in which enterprise grows. There's
Yes.
sort of mushrooming of new possibilities for many people, and
Yes.
now it's the new cool to say, oh, I grow my own microgreens, and we can barter, I'll give you
Yeah.
aloe and you give me your greens, so that's also a level of interaction and
Yeah.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that if as things begin to collapse further and further in terms of the supply chains of the world, because um, not this article, but the previous article, I did some reading about supply chains, and I became really aware of just how precarious the whole structure of supply chains is. As that begins to unravel, which I think it will if things don't turn around. I mean, let me put it this way. Our future, as far as I can tell, is either undoing supply chains and relocalizing by choice, or having it happen through calamity. That as it begins to unravel, either way, I'm imagining that more and more people also in the global north will rediscover the possibilities of communal pooling of resources. It will start with the lower classes, but eventually, if there's any positive future, it will be a future of recommoning, recreating and reestablishing the commons all over the world. That is the one thing that I can see as a potential positive future.
Just one more point I wanted to add, Miki, is that this summer, because it's the mango season in India, I was able to buy export quality mangoes because they couldn't be sent. So your point about where does food come from? It
Yeah,
comes from these countries, and now it was available to us. I even got export quality onions, and I was like, wow, onions look like this also,
yeah,
So yeah, that's a new reality.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm really appreciating the opportunity to have this bit of conversation which is both kind of like testing the thinking and deepening it at the same time. I'm very heartbroken and affirmed at the same time from hearing what you're saying. So thank you so much for bringing it in here.
Thank you.
One thing that I just wanted to connect with before I ask another question about consumption is, Miki, I've heard you talk about what a traumatic experience would have needed to happen in order for people to be living with the land and then to choose to go work in a factory for wage labor.
Yeah,
And
I wouldn't call that exactly a choice.
yeah.
Uh, when you wake up one day and there's no place to take your cow because the place that you were taking your cow to is now enclosed with a fence, you can't feed your family, and you then you find yourself having to go to work for someone else. And there were all these struggles where people would work for only a few days just to get enough to cover and then come back to the village to do this. But that didn't work for the capitalists. So there were a lot of struggles about all of these things, which I imagine are replicated everywhere that capitalism is being introduced for the first time. Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, want to hold that for a second. So my question is in terms of the consumption patterns of the global north, and I guess I'm just wondering whether you have any practices that people could use to reduce their consumption. And within that, I'm sort of thinking about the term of enoughness and how can we recognize enoughness when it seems like such a compulsive thing to want more and more.
Yeah. So I think this is where I see that the coronavirus has been, in a complicated way, a gift, because I hear spontaneously from many people that they're fine not doing all the things that were like an ordinary part of life before, that were high consumption activities. So we feel it that we don't need it. So the question is, since it already happened, is how to sustain it, rather than, oh, good, now I can go shopping again, which of course a lot of people will do. So there are a few things. One is we reduced the consumption, but we didn't get the other goodies that come with consumption reduction, which is higher quality relationships, more purpose conscious time, because of the fact that reduced consumption came with isolation. It's very hard to disentangle the two and just see that I was isolated. One day, this is not going to be for the rest of human life on the planet, that we're going to be isolated from each other. So at some point, there will be again the possibility of hanging out with people and hugging and kissing and doing all of those things. That will come, I'm quite certain of that, because we've had many pandemics in the life of humanity, many worse ones, and they all ended at some point. So we will have that. At that point, will we be able to remember that this and consumption are two separate pathways, and we don't have to accept both of them at the same time? We can increase our meaningful activities rather than increase our shopping activities. So that is one piece. But that doesn't actually do the thing that you're talking about, which is touching the experience of enoughness, which is elusive. So the first insight about this is that we cannot begin the practice of enoughness in relation to money. We have to begin it in relation to things that are actual objects. Money is an agreement. It's not a real thing, it's an agreement. It's not a real thing and it's not a real need. So we can never have a sense of enough, because money is just a translation into other needs. So in order to develop enoughness, we need to look at specific needs and ask myself, what is enough in relation to that need? And also at the same time, look at all the ways in which we attend to non-material needs through commodities. Those we can really reduce without any loss. I don't go to a therapist. I do, not these days because of the restrictions, but I have been going to people who care for my body. And that is because I have recognized myself personally as, because of the fact that I have a history of cancer, both myself and both sides of my family. And I live a high stress life by choice, by exposing myself and by mobilizing myself. I am at risk of of getting cancer again. That will be for the rest of my life. So I have thought through very carefully what practices I want to take on to care for my body. But that is physical. In terms of my emotional well-being, all of it is through relationships of flow and care and companionship. I have friends, I have other supporters, I have a morning circle that I meet with every week, all kinds of things. And I don't pay anyone for it. In fact, one of my body practitioners, who is a naturopath, I don't pay her per session. I give her a regular monthly amount. So it's more that I am participating in her sustainability than I'm paying her as an exchange. And she has become my community naturopath in the sense that I ask her questions about people that are not related to her. And she answers. It's like it's become a relationship that is more village-like than service provider. So it's that is a kind of really conscious choosing. You know, list all of your needs, list all of your resources, and look at how your resources are flowing to your needs. And is this the flow that you actually want? Are your resources, the way that you use them, are they caring sufficiently for your needs? Too much, too little? Are the ways that you use resources aligned with your life purpose? Are they aligned with your values? Where do you want to make changes? How can you direct some of your resources to contribute so that they flow far wider than within your tiny little sphere? There's no correct answer. It's the process of asking. Doing it repeatedly brings more consciousness, and I completely have faith that as we bring consciousness to our consumption, it will go down. Naturally, not because I should, but because I will see that it doesn't actually support me. And there is a book that helps with all of these practices that is called Your Money or Your Life. And it is full of practices that are designed to support people in reducing their consumption, aligning it with their goals, and achieving low consumption financial independence.
Yeah, I'm really sort of like touched by what you said about how enoughness can't ever be in relation to money, because I guess money has been like money has been the means to which to get the needs met for forever, or for my life. And so that just seems like such a a new concept.
Yeah, instead of how much money do I have and what can I do with this money, I want to invert it. What are my real needs? And what is the amount of money that is necessary to attend to my needs? And if I have less than that, what am I going to do to generate more resources? And if I have more than that, what am I going to do to pass on the resources that I have? That is the core practice.
Thank you.
What you touch on your towards the end of your article you take us to this fork, and at that fork stands patriarchy. And I would love for you to expand a little bit on that and how that relates to the neoliberal system that we are living in as of now.
Yeah. The patriarchy is, in the way that I look at it, isn't about gender. I see gender as an expression of patriarchy, but not as its cause. The cause of patriarchy, what led to it, is monumental loss of trust in life that resulted in scarcity, real scarcity, not manufactured scarcity, loss of trust in life, and therefore moving through natural mechanisms of fight, flight, freeze into a relationship of trying to control life. That is the essential movement of patriarchy, is the movement of control. The way that it relates to, if you look at patriarchy, it doesn't say man, it says father. And the moment fatherhood becomes important, in that moment, control is necessary, because you have no way of knowing who is the father without controlling the women. This is where the control became expressed through gender. But the fundamental source of it is loss of trust in life, and therefore attempting to control. And we are living that still to this day. And in one of my books, I have a chapter that is called Controlling to Death, because the more you try to control life, the more constrained life becomes. Because life is flowing, non-linear, regenerative, complex. Patriarchy tries to make it linear, controllable, predictable, repeatable, all of these things where they can express themselves naturally. And that is why there is progressively more death. So if I'm not talking about spiritual concepts, I'm talking about very literal, smaller areas. As you encroach on ecosystems, there is a smaller area in which all the species that previously had a larger area to work out the flow of resources, which includes killing, predation, and all of that. I'm not trying to beautify it. That is part of life. But all of that was happening in a larger area, and now it's in a smaller area. It's going to create more intensive conflicts within the natural world and between that and humans. I mean, in an earlier article I wrote about it, there is quite a bit of evidence that the very existence of the coronavirus is the result of such practices, because it comes from an encroachment on ecosystems, and therefore viruses that were within a niche, within an ecosystem, now exit that in search of other places to live, or the animals that carry them can no longer exist within the forests or whatever ecosystem they were part of. And similarly, human beings are progressively more constrained in their way of functioning. More and more things are suppressed. And so life is suppressed and therefore is declining. Yeah, I'm imagining you will have a follow-up question. But maybe not.
When you were talking about this, what came was that our consumption, like relentless consumption, still knowing that that consumption actually doesn't satisfy us, because we know it now. And
Yeah.
the question is, what is that, and how that relates to patriarchy? What are we controlling with this? Maybe.
Yeah. I think we are controlling our anxiety. So consumption itself has become an addiction. So there are pieces of anxiety that haven't been exposed. So I want to say them. So when you live on the land, however much you may be subjugated to the rules of whoever is controlling things, you actually can produce your own food, your own things on your own or in relationship with other people. When you live off the land, you can't produce your own food. So you depend on somebody else liking you enough to give you money so you can buy food. Liking you enough means hiring you for a job, buying your services, buying your products, or considering you worthy enough of charity. Those are the 4 ways that you can get money: job, selling products, selling services, and receiving charity. That's all that exists if you're not on the land. There is an inherent precariousness in that creates a kind of like low-grade permanent anxiety for everyone, and it's different in different classes in different parts of the world, but it's there. And so one of the things that I think consumption does is it's an attempt to relieve that anxiety. Yeah.
I was resonating a lot about the this tragedy, maybe the ultimate tragedy, that we could kill ourselves in trying to survive. And thinking about having a controlled response when confronted with a possibility of death. I'm wondering, having faced life-threatening illness myself, how to shift from that habitual patriarchal response to death to something that's more focused on needs and truly supportive of life.
So in effect, I would say that it all boils down to trying to control death. And that is the paradox, is if you try to control death, you're going to create more death. And so there is, on the most individual spiritual level, there is a tremendous amount of freedom to be gained from looking at and accepting the reality that everything dear to us will be gone. The Buddhists are really good with that. There's a particular one-liner that the Buddha, that I can't remember which book it comes from, but I remember the one line. The fact of death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. Now, if you meditate on that, you expand your capacity to hang out with anxiety. Because the essence of anxiety is about trying to control the future. That's why we're anxious. It's always about the future. It's never about the moment that is right in front of us. So if we are able to walk towards uncertainty, which is the truth of life, it's never not been true. If we're able to walk towards it, we gain freedom. The basic freedom of being able to be and choose how we want to respond to things, rather than being driven by anxiety and kind of like holding on to whatever it is. Wondering if that speaks to your question and if there's more.
Yeah, I'm liking the idea of hanging out with anxiety. And I'm chuckling too, because I was thinking feeling nervous about how do I ask this question perfectly.
There you go. You know, I accompanied my sister on a multi-year journey that ended in her death. And very early in the journey, I had a moment of grace in which I understood that any moment in which I think about the future is a moment in which I think about something I don't know. And that if I stay with what I do know, then I stay in the present. So at that moment, all we knew was she had large tumors and she was going to be going for surgery. There was a scheduled date for surgery. We didn't actually know that it was cancer until it was known later. And so from that moment through the rest of her time, I kept bringing myself back to what is in front of us now? What do we actually know? And the rest of it is in the future and we don't know. And there came a moment when I understood that if I stick with that practice, it's also the best preparation for the possibility that she might die. Because there would be a moment that we would know if she was going to die, there would be a moment in which that moment came. It's like, okay, so that is happening now. So now the next thing to do is to be with the dying process. I didn't need to think about it ahead of time. I just needed to be present for it unfolding in front of me. And that presence carried me for 2 months. And it was combined with gratitude. I was grateful for all the years that I had with her for her entire life, because she was my younger sister. So I was 9 when she was born. So I had 49 years of having her in my life, and I experienced enormous gratitude and presence with what is next, what else is there to do in this moment to make this death as good as it can be. It was amazing, and only came from my having had 7 years of practice in just being with what I know and not preoccupying myself with the future. So that is a way that we can, I think, live by choice at all times. And I really believe that the more we do that, the more we can free ourselves from all the patriarchal patterns, patriarchal capitalist patterns that rule our lives. And therein lies freedom for us and the possibility of life for all.